Baruch Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim Daf Chav Tes, and we are going to start on Chav Ches on the base around 11 lines from the bottom. Baruch Hashem. For more than 2 years, we've been starting every daf by saying today's daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim Matzah for the Shvuyim and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael. And I feel that today the Yeshua has arrived because today all those hostages who are still alive have been released, Baruch Hashem, from captivity. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you to Hashem, to President Trump, to all the Chayalim, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, to all those who worked day and night to get these hostages released. We owe our gratitude, but above all, we owe our gratitude to Hashem. So today's Daf Yomi, we're going to start on the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Beis. The Gemara is trying to find the source for the idea that when the Torah says that if you have the wrong intent to bring the carbon beyond the proper time, that is what's called a punishment of kares. That's pigul. But if you have the wrong intent to bring the carbon in the improper place, that is disqualified, but it's not kares. So the Gemara had suggested several possibilities in yesterday's daf, but today's daf on the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Beis, the Gemara says, everything comes from a pasuk in Parashas Tzav, and Rav is going to darshan the entire pasuk. The pasuk is, I'll read it first. Vayikra Zayim Parak Yudches. We're on the bottom of Chav Ches Amud Beis, 11 lines from the bottom, 28b, 11 lines from the bottom. So the whole pasuk that Rav is darshaning is as follows: Vim he'achol ye'achel mibasar zeval shamav bayom hashlishi lo ye'ratzeh makrivoto lo ye'chashev lo pigul yiyeh v'nefesh alchelas mimenu avonat tisa. So what does this pasuk mean? He'achol ye'achel. If eat, you will eat it. Peshtei achil is a custom daber. The pasuk is referring to two types of eating: echad achilas adam, echad achilas mizbeach. Whether it refers to the eating of a man. I mean to say when the person intended to eat this meat in the improper, beyond the proper time, or achilas adam, or achilas mizbeach, or the sprinkling of the eating of the altar, which is the sprinkling of the blood. Mibasar zeval shamav, from the meat of the karban shlamim. Ma shamav mifaglin umispaglin. I've called mifaglin umispaglin. Just like the karban shlamim, where the blood is where he caused it to become pigul, meaning to say because he considered during the time of the service to sprinkle it beyond the proper time, and that's what makes the carbon pigul. And the meat and the flesh is what becomes pigul. I've called mefaglin umispaglin, that this only applies to something that's mefagel and also becomes pigul, i.e. to exclude the komets. When it says hashlishi, on the third day, that refers to chutz lizmano, that you have intent to do these things beyond the proper time. Lo ye'ratzeh, and it will not achieve a ritzah, it will not achieve a kapara, that this refers to the sprinkling, that the sprinkling of this carbon will not achieve atonement. Hartas kashar kain hartas pasal. And this teaches us that just like when it comes to a ritzah of a kshera, of a kosher one, so to a ritzah of a psua. Ma'artas kashar ache krivenu komatirav. Just like when it comes to hartas kashar, it only works when everything, all the materium achieve atonement. Av hartas pasal, ache kriva komatirav. Also, pigul only happens once everything is done, every other thing is done properly. Hamakriv. This becomes pigul if the thought happened during the time of the bringing of the carbon to eat it on the third day, but not actually if you had the thought on the third day itself. Meaning to say, if you didn't think that while you're bringing the carbon and you ate from it on the third day, that's not going to be considered pasul retroactively. So this is the Boker Tov, Jeff, on the very last line on Chav Ches Amud Beis. So this is the source that we're talking about a disqualification in the intent. Also, what do we do from that pasuk? This teaches us that the pasuk is talking about where the carbon is disqualified, but not the kohen. Excuse me. On top of 29a. So we see from here that if in addition to the thought about pigul, meaning to say beyond the proper time, you also had a different thought that was accompanying it, that was also a disqualifying thought, then the carbon does not become pigul. Pigul has to be a pure one thought of disqualification, i.e., beyond the proper time. Yeah. Melamed shemitztafin zed. What does it mean by yeah? This teaches us that if, let's say, you have you don't have the full shear, but by combining chutzlas mano or chutzlam komo, and each of them are half shiurim, then you have a full shear. Then it will cause a disqualification. Nefesh al chelas mimenu, and the one who eats from it will get kares. Echad v'lo shnayim. Meaning to say that only one of these sins gets kares. That is beyond the proper time and not beyond the proper place. The ezezez that chutzlas mano has beyond the proper time. The gamar avan avami nosar the damila bezav, and that's because we compare it to nosar, which or somebody who eats nosar, which is also a punishment of kares, and it's comparable be zayin bez. Zayin bez. What's zayin bez? We said yesterday that it is zman and bama, that they have those two characteristics, that they're both beyond the proper time and both apply in outside the base of mikdash and a bama. Papa or Rava. So this is how Rava darish in the whole pasuk. So Rav Papa says to Rava, "Lididach shlishi the parashas kedoshin to you, my darash to be," because we said that they're both are two psukim, one in Sav and one in parashas kedoshin, that deal with the word the third day, and you're saying the one in parashas kedoshim deals with the one in parashas Sav deals with beyond the proper time. So what does the one in parashas kedoshim deal with? Why do we need it? So, Hahumi Baile, so says Rabbi, we need that to tell us a makom shem meshuash bedam bebasar beimurin. It's telling us that if you have a machshava, if you have a thought beyond the proper place, it's only disqualified if you thought to eat the meat or to sprinkle the water, to bring the murim in a place that is meshuash, that has three laws, three different aspects that apply to it. Like we said in Koheles on Shabbos, this is the opposite way. If it's three laws that all apply to it, then it'll be disqualified. I mean to say, a place where three mitzvahs could be done, i.e., that the blood and the sprinkling of the blood, the eating of the meat, and the bringing of the limbs, they own that where you're not allowed to do any of them, and that's only outside the Azara. And because outside of the Azara, when there was during the time of the Bamos, you could do all of these. But if he thought to eat the meat in the sanctuary, even though that's chutzlam komo, then it's not going to disqualify, because the sanctuary is a place where you're not able to bring the emurin and to eat the meat, so therefore it wouldn't apply. But you would have been able to do all those things beyond in the place outside the courtyard during the time of the bama. Typically, so Gemara says, but if that's the case, why do you need that? You could have learned that mikra kamen me'achol ye'achel. So the Gemara says no. Mida'afka rachmana b'lashon shlishi. For the fact that Torah uses the lashon shlishi with it, the expression of the third, we see from here that needs to be a makom meshuash. Amar Rashi Amriso Shmaita Kamedra Mas. Now Amalei Ime Hasam Avamina. If you, so he said to me, no, you can't learn this from the first pasuk, because if it was from the first pasuk, I would have said shlishi prat. Shlishi means it's specific, and pigol is qual. And that's the call musafa prat. This Rabbi Sharma comment. I would have said it includes all places, not only the makom meshuash. Kamash one. So therefore, we need this second pasuk. So now, the Gemara, we're basically going to start a new brisa, and the Gemara is going to say from this new brisa that the concept that pigul is chutz lizmano, that pigul comes from a thought beyond the proper time. It says the brisa, Tana Rabbana, we're on 29a, around 10 lines on the top. V'im he'ochel ye'ochel mi b'sar Zevachim. That's the pasuk that we've been citing from Parashat Tav. Amar Belazar kof aznachal shmoah. Dip your ear to listen. Dip your ear to hear. That the pasuk, when it's talking about this severe punishment of pigul, it refers to somebody who's intending to eat from his korban on the third day, meaning to say that beyond the proper time. So the Gemara says, "Oh, eno ella, but maybe it's when somebody is." Maybe it's not somebody who intends to eat from the korban on the third day, but maybe it refers to somebody who actually eats from the korban on the third day. Gemara says, no. Amris, no, we're not going to say that. Why? So you mean to say that after the korban was kosher, if you came back and disqualified it, Do you think to say that it's possible that a carbon will become kosher through the sprinkling of the blood, and then afterwards retroactively will be disqualified by eating the meat after the time? We can't say that. That doesn't seem logical. So I'm Rabbi Akiva, what are you talking about? Hey, Matzinu, Bizav, Bizav, Vishameres Keneged Yom. These are all questions of person achieving purity. And in order to achieve the purity, they have to wait a certain amount of time in a state of cleanliness and without blood, and then or other sightings, and then afterwards they build up those days. But if they have a sighting, it becomes retroactively disqualified. So we see that does happen. Shame that they are in a state of ritual purity. Once they see it, may become disqualified. It ruins their previous count. So it's possible that even though the carbon was kosher, if you ate it on the third day, you'd be disqualifying the carbon. So Amarle, so Rabbi Eliezer responds to Rabbi Akiva, Areyu Omer Amakriv. No, it says in the pasuk, it says Lo Yiratzah Amakriv, meaning to say the one who brings it. Pashas Akrava who nifsol. During the time of the bringing it, when it becomes disqualified, the Eno nifsol b'shlishi. The carbon does not become disqualified on the third day. It became disqualified initially. So the Gemara says, "Oh, Eno Omer Hamakriv." Or maybe the word Hamakriv means Elazar Kohen Hamakriv. Maybe it's the Kohen who brings it. Maybe if he is the one who is, maybe if he is that if he had the thought during the time of the service, that means to say that he's disqualified to be a Kohen. Maybe he's disqualified himself forever. No, Kishomer Oso says the word Oso, but Zevachim and Dabar Veinu Medavar Kohen. So that refers to a Zevach and not a Kohen. Ben Azai gives a different explanation in the word Oso. Ben Azai says, what does Oso mean? Matam Homer. Pishanemar Losa Acher L'Shamo. It says, you should not delay paying your vow. I might think somebody who delays their vow and they pay the korban late, they have not fulfilled their obligation. No, the korban, if it's delayed, will not meaning to say, if you have an improper thought, the korban is not effective. But somebody who delays their vow, that korban will be still effective. That's how Ben Azai says it. It says in the pasuk, lo yechashev. What does that mean? No, it became disqualified through the improper thought when he brings the korban, but not on the third day. Ben Azai, remember we had said that the word that. Remember we had said that according to the previous position. How do we know that since Ben Azai uses the word oso, that teach us that if somebody delays their vow, it's okay. Now the other, that the korban is still okay. The other pasuk had said it applies to the korban and not to the Kohen. So how does Ben Azai know that teaching that applies to the korban and not to the Kohen? Ben Azai the bezevach hakasim medaber ve'inu Kohen menalei. Yibay say menaf goy medacher. One possibility is they learn that from the way Acherim learn it out from Lo Yechashev, or Yibay Seim, or else alternatively Midachsev Lo Yeratzeh. Lo Yeratzeh Zivcha. It says in the pasuk Lo Yeratzeh, that refers to a korban and not to the Kohen. Uben Azai Oso Lo Yeratzeh Ve'em Acharne Drab Lo Yeratzeh Mehachanach. But is this really the source for Ben Azai's position that the korban, this korban will not achieve atonement? Will not be effective, but somebody who delays their vow will be effective. Is this pasuk the source for it? But didn't he learn out from the position of the acherim, from other chachamim? The Tanya acherim omrim, that acherim say, so let's say you have a firstborn, and you have to bring the animal to the korban within the first year, but let's say it becomes after it becomes older than 1 year. And so then how do we know? You might have thought, so I might think once it becomes older than a year, it becomes like a blemished animal and it can no longer be brought. It says in the pasuk, on the top of Chav Tes on the base, and you have to eat the Meiser Sheni before Hashem. Makish Bechor Meiser. So we compare the firstborn animal to the Meiser Sheni. My Meiser Eno Nifsal Mishano Chaverta. Just like the Meiser Sheni is not disqualified from 1 year to the next. Meaning to say that you have more than 1 year to eat the Meiser Sheni. As it was saying in the Pasuk, Bishlishi is this Mambi, or the 3rd year. You have up until the 3rd year to eat the Meiser Sheni. Also, the firstborn animal is not going to be disqualified from 1 year to the next. So that's the idea, that the carbon is not disqualified if you delay bringing your vow. So why do we say you learned it out from Oso? Gemara says no, it's just you need both. Why? You might have thought to say Hani Mili Bechor, the Lav Bar Hartzah, that's by a firstborn animal. We're there. The carbon is not brought for a kapara, it's not Hartzah. It's brought as a mitzvah to bring the firstborn animal, but it's not a kapara. But of a kodshim, the Bnei Hartzah, but those sacrifices which are brought as a kapara, so I might have thought they don't work if it's delayed. Kamashman. Mar says, "Va'akati me'asam nafka." Is that really the source that if you delay your vow, it's still going, and you bring your carbon, it's still an effective carbon? It says, "Va'yabachachet," below the carbon chachet, that it says there'll be a sin in you, which means that if you delay your vow, you'll have a sin, but not your offering. Well, then azai. So isn't that the source? Isn't that the source for the idea? The Gemara says, "Ben azai will say, hahu mi bayaway." Ben Azai will say that pasuk is teaching us it means say if you delay your vow, it's your sin, but it's not your wife's sin. You might have thought to say that since we have a teaching, now a wife of a man will die if money is requested from him and he doesn't pay it. Rashi says it means if he's stolen, he doesn't pay it back. But Tosfos says that it means that it's the sin of making a vow. And if a person makes a vow to give charity and doesn't give the money, then his wife, Rahman al will die. And the reason for that is, it seems very simple, that if a person makes a promise to Hashem to bring a vow, and he doesn't keep it, then Hashem will not keep his promise to keep safe that what this man cherishes and values the most. As it quotes the pasuk from Mishlei, if you don't have to pay, if you took something, you don't pay it, why should your wife be taken away from you? Meaning to say, chapter 22, verse 27, meaning of Proverbs, meaning to say that if you don't pay what you're supposed to pay, you lose your wife. So, you might have thought that also this sin of Baal Tacher, of not paying your vow, that the person will die. Kamashma, we don't say that. The Gemara, so the Gemara says, Acher moment. The Gemara says it's a position in the Brisa that of the Acherim who say that it says, Lo Yechashev, and from the fact that it says that, it means to say that it's disqualified by Machshavu Nifsal, Ve'enu Nifsal B'Shlishi. Disqualified through improper thought, but not actually just eating it on the 3rd day without having the improper thought to eat on the 3rd day. Improper thought is what disqualifies the carbon, not the actual eating. Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer, who says that this pasuk is learned out from Hamakriv, that it becomes possible during the moment of disqualification. What does he do with lo yechashev? And he says that we need to teach us the halacha, which we're going to get into in the next Mishnah, which momentarily, Meretz Hashem, and that is that if you have two improper thoughts, they cancel each other out, and the carbon becomes not disqualified. As it says, lo yechashev, lo yarev, bo machshavot acheros. That two improper thoughts will not cancel out the carbon. Okay. How do we know? It's not that the carbon is kosher, it's that the carbon doesn't become pigul. It will still be disqualified. But how do we know, according to Amare, how does he know this idea? What does he do from the words? It's to tell us, how do you know that if you have the improper thought by kodshim, that it's a penalty where you get lashes? But why? Isn't it as a prohibition without an action? Any prohibition without an action you don't get lashes for it. Amrulay, no, this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav Shein Bomaisa. This is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that even though it's a prohibition without an action, you do get lashes. Okay, so now we go on to what? So first of all, I'm just saying is saying the words in action. That's a dispute we had in Makos about whether or not speaking is considered an action. And remember, we said that was a machlokas amongst the Amoraim. And also, secondly, the question here is: do you actually have to say it out loud? So Rashi and Tosfos say you don't have to say it out loud, and Rambam says you do. Maybe I'm mixing it up. That's what I thought. What?
I only heard from you, so.
No, I could be saying it the wrong way. I thought that Rambam says you have to say it out loud, but then Rashi and Tosfos say you don't. Go back for a second. The bottom of Chav Zayin Beis at the Mishnah. Okay. So many footnotes. It's hard to find the exact one. Okay. I'll let you look for it later. Okay, so says the Mishnah. This is the general rule. Somebody who has a thought, if a person does one of these avodos, with the shchita, the kabbalah, the halacha, the zrika, with the thought to quote unquote consume something that typically is consumed, i.e., the meat, or to burn something that's typically burnt, i.e., the limbs, chutzlam komo, outside the place, possible, it's going to be disqualified. But the aimbo kares, and he does not get kares. But chutzlam mano, but if he does it beyond the proper time, pigo v'chayav and of kares. It's pigo, and he's liable for kares. Bavachi yakriv hamatir kemitzvoso. This is only going to be the halacha that it's going to be pigo and he gets kares if the rest of the korban is done properly. That there's no other disqualifying idea aside from beyond the proper time. But if he did not bring it properly, but there was another disqualifying thought, then the korban does not become pigo and you don't get kares for eating it. So the Mishnah clarifies this principle. Keitzad karav amatir kemitzvaso. What does it mean that everything else was perfect except for this thought, this chutzlas mano? So shachar peshtika, when he slaughtered it, he didn't have any improper thoughts. V'kibo v'aloch v'zara chutzlas mano, and then he did the kabbalah, the halacha, the zrika, one of them, or even all of them, beyond the proper time, with the thought to do it beyond the proper, to eat beyond the proper time. Or he did the shchita with the thought to eat beyond the proper time. And he did everything else properly. Or he did all of them with the thought of beyond the proper time. That's going to be something that is otherwise done right, and he gets kares if he eats the korban. So what does it mean if you didn't do it otherwise right? Shachat chutzlam komo, if you slaughtered it beyond the proper place with the intent of beyond the proper place, and you received it and you conveyed it and you sprinkled it beyond the proper time, or if you slaughtered it and received it and conveyed it beyond the proper place, meaning to say that you slaughtered it beyond the proper place and then you received it with beyond the proper time, meaning to say you're combining two thoughts. One is beyond the proper time, which is pigul. One is beyond the proper place, which is just a psul, but it's not pigul. And so therefore it's going to be not make a pigul because you're combining two thoughts. Or if you had improper intent with the Pesach and the Chatas, which disqualifies. The kibul v'aruch v'zerach chutzos mano, and you combine that with pigul beyond the proper time. Or you do it the opposite way. You slaughtered beyond the proper time, and you had the Kabbalah, the Lach, and the Zrika with the intent of Shlo Lishma, or the opposite, or your thought was where you did the first three with improper intent. So that doesn't make pigul because it's not done perfectly. Let's say you have two improper thoughts. One was to eat a kazayas beyond the proper place, and then to eat the kazayas the next day, or kazayas l'machar and kazayas b'chutz, or you reverse the intent, or b'chatzi zayas b'chutz and kachatzi zayas l'machar, or a half an olive size of each which you combine, or b'chatzi zayas l'machar kachatzi zayas b'chutz. In all these cases, pasal ve'im mokaris. So it says Rabbi Yehuda argues about this. He says, no, if the improper thought about the proper time comes before the improper thought about the proper place, that's going to be considered pigul v'chayav of kares. That's pigul, and you're liable for kares because you've already established the pigul with the beyond the proper time. And so therefore, by having a thought beyond the proper place, you're not going to uproot the pigul that you had. Otherwise, there's a way you can get rid of the pigul. But if beyond the proper place comes before beyond the proper time, then it would be disqualified and there's no kares because then you had the improper place before the proper time. So then you had the improper thought before the pigul thought. Chum say, well, it doesn't matter which comes first. In both cases, it's disqualified and there's no kares, and that's basically a restatement of the Tanakhama's position. So let's say the improper thought is about two half of a shiurim, which you're now combining, achila and aktara. Then we're going to say it's kosher. She'ein achila v'aktara mitzdarfen. Then it's kosher because the eating and it's actually kosher. It's not even disqualifying because the eating and the two different types of eating, the eating of the mizbech and the eating of the person, are not going to be combined. So, okay, this is today's daf. Yomi, so we'll go upstairs to daven for Hoshana Rabbah about a big shkoyach. I know Hoshana Rabbah is a day of the great salvation. And this is a day of the great salvation of the Jewish people. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of things to be worried about and be nervous about. But this is a day of Hoshana Rabbah for the Jewish people where the hostages are released, but I wouldn't say greater than that, there's nothing greater than saving life, but also the fact that now the Prime Minister of Israel is meeting with 20 Arab countries. I don't think that ever happened in the history of the world. Never happened in the history.
Just on the radio,